1907, Pittsburgh. You step inside a steel mill, and within seconds something feels wrong. Not just uncomfortable, wrong. The air is thick, heavy, almost solid, like you're trying to breathe through a sheet itself. Every inhale burns slightly deeper than a watch, and your body instinctively tells you to turn around, to leave before it gets worse. But no one else leaves. Men walk past you like this is normal, like this suffocating heat, the constant noise, the pressure in the air, like it's just another day. Their faces are tired, covered in soot, but focused. They've already accepted something you haven't yet. This place does not care if you survive, and yet they stay. At first, the sound is what gets to you. A low, constant rumble that never fully stops. It vibrates through the ground, travels up your legs, into your chest. It's not just noise, it feels alive, like something deep inside the building is moving, shifting, pushing against its limits. Then it grows louder. Metal slams, steam hisses, fire roars somewhere in the distance. The sounds overlap until they become one continuous, overwhelming presence. You try to focus, but your mind keeps drifting back to the same thought. What is making that sound? And why does it feel like it's getting closer? Then you see it, the blast furnace. At first, it's just a shape in the darkness, tall, unnatural, glowing faintly from within. But as you get closer, scale becomes impossible to ignore. It towers over everything, a massive structure of iron and brick, radiating heat like a living thing. The light coming from inside isn't steady. It flickers, pulses, shifts, like something breathing. And suddenly, that rumble makes sense. It's not just a machine running. It's pressure, fire, gas, movement, all trapped inside something that was never meant to fail. You take a step closer and instantly regret it. The heat hits you like a physical force, not just warmth, impact. It presses against your skin, dries your throat, makes your eyes water. You instinctively raise your arm to shield your face, but it doesn't help much. And the men working near, they don't react. They move with precision, almost mechanically, stepping around molten metal, sparks, and open heat like they've memorized every danger. Because they have to. Out here, hesitation isn't just a mistake. It's how people disappear. And that's when the realization hits you. This isn't temporary. This furnace doesn't shut down at night. It doesn't cool off. It doesn't rest. Once it's lit, it stays alive, day after day, month after month, sometimes for years. Because stopping it might be even more dangerous than running it. So the fire keeps burning, no matter what happens, no matter who gets hurt, no matter how close it comes to breaking. And standing there, feeling the heat, hearing the endless roar, you begin to understand something that everyone else here already knows. This isn't just a machine. It's something that cannot be stopped. At some point, every worker inside that mill understood one terrifying truth. The furnace cannot be stopped. Not because they didn't want to stop it, but because stopping it could destroy everything. Inside the furnace, temperatures reach extreme levels, hot enough to melt iron, reshape metal, and keep a constant chemical reaction alive. But that same heat was also holding the structure together. The inner walls, made of special refractory bricks, expanded under pressure, adjusting to the constant force from inside. If that heat suddenly disappeared, everything changed. The bricks would contract. Stress would build instantly. Cracks could spread through the entire structure in ways no one could predict. What looked solid from the outside could collapse from within. So the workers didn't just fear the fire. They feared what would happen if it went out. Restarting a furnace wasn't simple either. It wasn't like flipping a switch. If a furnace cooled completely, bringing it back online could take weeks, sometimes longer. Entire sections had to be rebuilt, damaged bricks replaced, internal structures inspected and repaired. often while still unstable. And even then, there was no guarantee it would survive the restart. There were cases where furnaces cracked the moment they were reheated. Others became permanently unusable, forcing companies to abandon massive investments overnight. In an industry where time meant money and delays meant losses, that kind of risk wasn't acceptable. So instead of stopping, they kept it running, no matter what condition it was in. And the pressure wasn't just physical, it was economic. A single blast furnace could produce hundreds of tons of iron every day. That output fueled entire industries, construction, railroads, weapons, cities themselves. Every hour the furnace stopped meant lost production, lost profit, lost momentum. Managers understood the risks. Engineers understood the risks. Even the workers understood the risks. But the system they were part of didn't allow hesitation. Because once you start depending on constant output, stopping becomes more dangerous than continuing. So small problems were ignored. Minor cracks were monitored, but not fixed. Warning signs became part of the routine, and slowly, the line between safe and dangerous began to disappear. Inside the furnace, everything was in constant motion. Hot air blasted upward with incredible force, feeding the fire and driving chemical reactions. At the same time, layers of iron, ore, coke, and limestone slowly descended, moving deeper into the heat. It was a delicate balance. Too much pressure, and the system could rupture. Too little, and the reaction would fail. But here's the problem. Back then, there were no modern sensors, no digital systems, no precise monitoring. Everything depended on human judgment. Workers had to read the furnace like a living thing, watching the color of the flame, listening to subtle changes in sound, feeling vibration through the ground. And if they misread even one sign, the consequences could be immediate. So every day became a gamble, not an obvious one, not a dramatic moment where everything suddenly went wrong, but a slow, constant risk, a question that repeated itself over and over again in the minds of the workers. Is it still safe, or has it already gone too far? And the most dangerous part, most of the time, nothing happened. The furnace kept running. The system held together, which made it easier to believe that it always would, until the day it didn't. The danger didn't stay inside the steel mill. It followed the workers home. By the early 1900s, entire towns began to grow around these massive furnaces. Not far away, not at a safe distance, but right next to them. Houses were built within sight of the flames. Streets ran alongside rail tracks carrying molten metal. Life in industry became impossible to separate. At night, the sky never turned fully dark. Instead, it glowed red, a constant, unnatural light reflecting off smoke and ash, stretching across rooftops and windows. Children grew up thinking this was normal. Families ate dinner under a sky that looked like it was always burning. And slowly, without realizing it, people stopped questioning it. The noise never stopped either. Even miles away, you could still hear it. A distant rumble, like thunder that never faded. Windows rattled in their frames. Walls carried vibrations deep into the night. Sleep wasn't quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was interrupted. Again and again, families learned to rest through the sound. Not because it was comfortable, but because they had no choice. You couldn't escape it. You couldn't turn it off. The furnace didn't follow a schedule. It didn't care about day or night. It just kept going. And eventually, people adapted. Not because it was safe, but because it was constant. The air itself became part of the problem. Smoke drifted through the streets daily. Fine particles settled on rooftops, on clothes, on skin. You could wipe a surface clean in the morning, and by evening, it would already be covered again. Breathing felt different here, heavier, not always painful, just wrong. And over time, people stopped noticing. Because when something surrounds you every day, it stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like reality. But the truth was, the risk never disappeared. It just became invisible. Inside the homes, life continued as if nothing was wrong. Families gathered, conversations happened, children played, meals were cooked. Everything looked normal from the outside. But in the background, there was always something else. A constant awareness, a feeling that just beyond the walls, something massive was always running, always burning, always one step away from becoming uncontrollable. The furnace wasn't just part of the landscape, it was part of their lives, and no one could truly step away from it. And for the workers, there was no separation at all. They would leave the mill after 12 exhausting hours, only to return to a place that still felt connected to it. The same sky, the same air, the same distant roar that never stopped. There was no real off switch, not for the furnace, and not for them, which meant the danger wasn't something they could escape at the end of the day. It was something they lived with, every hour, every night, every breath, and the longer it continued, the more normal it began to feel, until something finally went wrong. The furnace didn't need to explode to kill you. It didn't need fire, or falling metal, or a catastrophic failure. Sometimes, it didn't even need to be seen, because one of the most dangerous threats inside a steel mill was completely invisible. No color, no smell, no warning, just air. At least, that's what it felt like. Workers would walk through it, stand in it, breathe it in, completely unaware that, with every second, something inside their body was beginning to shut down. And by the time they realized something was wrong, it was usually too late. The gas came from the furnace itself, a byproduct of the process, unavoidable, constant, and deadly. Carbon monoxide. In some areas, it reached levels high enough to kill a person in minutes. But here's what made it truly dangerous. You couldn't detect it. No smell to warn you. No color to see. No immediate pain. At first, it felt like nothing. And that's exactly why it worked. The symptoms didn't come all at once. They crept in slowly. A headache, a slight dizziness, a strange sense of confusion, easy to ignore, especially after hours of exhausting work in extreme heat. Most workers assumed it was just fatigue, just another part of the job. But it wasn't, because while they were trying to push through it, their bodies were already losing oxygen, their muscles weakening, their thoughts slowing down, their reactions fading, until suddenly, they couldn't stand anymore. And then they would collapse, sometimes alone, sometimes in front of others. At first, people didn't always understand what was happening. They thought it was heat exhaustion, overwork, weakness, but then it started happening again, and again, and again. Workers falling without warning, in areas where nothing looked dangerous. That's when they realized the truth. The air itself could kill you. And the worst part, rescue could make it worse. When someone collapsed, others rushed in to help. Instinctively, without protection, without understanding what they were walking into, they would lift the body, try to carry it out. And then, one by one, they would start to feel the same symptoms. Dizziness, confusion, weakness, until the rescuers became victims too. The gas didn't care who you are. It didn't rush. It didn't panic. It just spread, quietly, patiently, waiting. The first signs were easy to miss. Nothing dramatic. No explosions. No sudden collapse. Just small changes. A slight bulge in the outer shell. A new vibration under your feet. A patch of wall that seemed just a little hotter than usual. Individually, they didn't look like danger. But inside the furnace, something was already changing. The inner lining, the only thing separating molten iron from the outside world, was slowly wearing down. Day after day, hour after hour, it was being scraped, burned, and reshaped by heat that never stopped. And the worst part, no one could see how thin it had become. Inside, The damage was uneven. Some areas held strong, others didn't. Molten iron and slag moved constantly, eroding certain sections faster than others. Over time, this created weak points, places where the wall was thinner, weaker, more exposed to heat and pressure. But from the outside, everything still looked normal. No alarms, no clear warning, just the structure slowly losing its strength from within. And the longer it ran, the worse it became. Workers noticed things. They always did. A new sound, a different rhythm in the vibration, a subtle shift in how the heat felt against their skin. Experience taught them to pay attention, but knowing something was wrong didn't mean they could act on it. Because stopping the furnace wasn't just difficult, it was discouraged, sometimes even punished. So instead of shutting it down, they adapted. They worked around the problem, adjusted their movements, ignored what they couldn't fix, and hoped it would hold. Repairs were done while the furnace was still running. Think about that. Instead of cooling it down safely, they patched it in real time. Workers replaced breaks, reinforced sections, sealed leaks, all while standing just feet away from extreme heat and falling metal. It wasn't about restoring safety. It was about buying time, because every repair came with the same silent understanding. This doesn't fix the problem, it just delays it. And that's how failure really began, not as a single moment, but as a slow build-up. Small compromises layered over time, minor damage left unaddressed, decisions made under pressure, until one day, the structure crossed a line no one could see. From the outside, it still looked the same, still running, still producing, still stable, but inside, it was already past the point of no return, and the only question left was, how much longer before it finally gives way? When the furnace finally failed, there was no warning siren, no countdown, no time to prepare. One moment, everything felt routine, the same heat, the same rhythm, the same control chaos workers had learned to live with. And the next, something changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift, a pressure that didn't feel right, a sound that didn't match anything they'd heard before. And in places like this, that was enough to know something was very wrong. Deep inside the furnace, the weakened wall finally gave in. Not all at once, but enough. A small breach, invisible from most angles. But on the inside, it was everything. Because behind that wall wasn't just heat. It was thousands of degrees of molten iron, constantly moving, constantly pressing outward, searching for the weakest point. And now, it had found one. At first, it didn't look like much. A glow where there shouldn't be one. A brighter spot. A small leak of light. But then the pressure built, and the metal didn't drip. It surged. Molten iron forced its way through the opening, spilling out with sudden speed. Not slow, not controlled, but unstoppable. The floor changed instantly. What had been solid ground just seconds ago became something else entirely. Workers reacted immediately, not with confusion, but with instinct, because this wasn't something you could think through. You either moved, or you didn't. The iron spread across the floor, following gravity, filling low points, moving around obstacles. It didn't explode wildly. It flowed, fast and relentless, turning the environment into something unfamiliar in seconds. Heat intensified, visibility dropped. Every second mattered, and in that moment, knowledge of the space, every path, every platform, every exit, became the only thing keeping you alive. Then, just as quickly as it began, it slowed. The iron cooled, the movement stopped, and what remained was silence. Not complete silence. The furnace was still running, but something different, heavier, still, the kind of silence that follows something that shouldn't have happened, but did. The damage was done. The system had failed, even if only for a moment. And yet, after cleanup, after repairs, the furnace would be trusted again. because it had to be. Most of the time, the furnace didn't fail quietly. Sometimes it reacted, and when it did, it happened fast, especially at night. Fewer supervisors, less visibility, more fatigue. The same environment, but harder to read, harder to control. Workers move through dim light, relying on memory more than sight. Every platform, every ladder, every path had to be known without thinking, because if something went wrong, there wouldn't be time to figure it out. Inside the furnace, everything depended on balance. Air blasted in at extreme temperatures, feeling the reaction. Materials descended at a control grade. Pressure, heat, and flow had to stay aligned. But that balance was never perfect. Sometimes pressure built unevenly. Sometimes flow was disrupted. And sometimes the system pushed back, not gradually, not predictably, but all at once. A blocked opening, a sudden shift in pressure, a change no one saw coming. That's all it took. In a matter of seconds, controlled movement could turn into something violent. Gases could reverse direction. Heat could surge into areas where it wasn't supposed to be. Openings that were meant to contain the system suddenly release it. And when that happened, the environment changed instantly. Workers didn't wait to understand it. They moved, because there was no time to analyze, no time to confirm what was happening. Only reaction, a sudden rush of heat, a blast of air, a shift in light. These were the only signals they had. And in those moments, instinct mattered more than experience. People ran, not in panic, but in urgency. Fast, precise movement through a space they had memorized over years. Because hesitation, even for a second, could be the difference. And just like that, it would stop. No long build-up, no clear ending. One moment, everything was unstable. The next, it wasn't. The furnace returned to its normal rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But the workers knew. They felt it. A reminder that control was never absolute. That everything they relied on was only stable until it wasn't. And the most unsettling part, tomorrow, they would come back and do it again. By this point, one idea had taken hold across the entire industry. Stopping the furnace was not safety. It was risk. That sounds backwards at first. You would expect shutting everything down to be the safest option. Remove the heat, stop the reaction, eliminate the danger. But inside a blast furnace, nothing was that simple. Because the system wasn't designed to pause. It was designed to keep going. Constant heat, constant flow, constant pressure. And the moment that stopped, everything inside began to change. Not slowly, immediately. Cooling a furnace was a process that could take weeks. Not hours, not days, weeks. And even then, it had to be done carefully, step by step, controlling temperature changes to avoid damaging the structure. Because if it cooled too quickly, the internal brake lining could crack, the outer shell could shift. Stress that had been balanced under heat would suddenly redistribute in unpredictable ways. What had once been stable under extreme conditions could become fragile when it cooled. And once that damage happened, there was no easy fix. Restarting it was even worse. Bringing the furnace back online after a full shutdown wasn't guaranteed to work. In some cases, the structure had weakened so much during cooling that reheating caused further damage. Cracks expanded, sections failed. Entire furnaces had to be partially rebuilt from the inside. And that meant time, massive amounts of time, which meant lost production, lost money, lost momentum. So the question wasn't just about safety anymore. It became a decision about survival, not for the workers, but for the system itself. By the early 1900s, demand for iron was massive. Railroads, buildings, machinery, everything depended on it. Blast furnaces were producing hundreds of tons every single day. Entire industries were built around their continuous output. If one furnace stopped, it didn't just affect one location. It disrupted supply chains, delayed construction, slowed growth, and in some cases, cost companies more than they could afford. So keeping the furnace running wasn't just a choice, it was expected. And that's how the system trapped itself. The longer a furnace ran, the harder it became to stop. Every additional day increased dependence. Every additional week increased the cost of shutdown. Every additional year made the idea of stopping feel more dangerous than continuing. So even when problems appeared, even when risks became obvious, the decision stayed the same. Keep it running, not because they didn't understand the danger, but because at that point, stopping felt worse. By the time all of this was understood, the cost had already been paid, not in numbers, not in reports, but in people. Injuries inside steel mills weren't rare events. They weren't shocking. They weren't even unexpected. They were part of the environment, something workers learned to live with, just like the heat, the noise, and the constant pressure. Burns happened, faults happened, exposure happened, and most of the time, work didn't stop, because it couldn't. By the early 20th century, hundreds of thousands of men were working in iron and steel production, each one entering the same environment, each one accepting the same risks. And while not every shift ended in an accident, the possibility was always there, not as a distant fear, but as something close, something real, something that could happen at any moment, and everyone knew it, even if they didn't say it out loud. So why did they keep coming back? It wasn't because they didn't understand the danger. It was because they didn't have better options. The work was hard, but it paid. And for many families, that mattered more than anything else. There weren't many alternatives. Skills were limited. Opportunities were scarce. And walking away from the job didn't just affect one person. It affected everyone depending on it. So they returned, again and again, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. Safety existed, but it was limited. Protective clothing helped, but only to a point. Training taught awareness, but not control. Workers were expected to stay alert, to notice changes, to react quickly, because in an environment like this, that was often the only protection they had. And when something went wrong, explanations usually focused on the moment. A misstep, a delay, a mistake, rarely the system itself, because the system was never supposed to be questioned. And so the cycle continued. Work, risk, recovery, repeat. Communities adapted. Companies replaced workers when needed. Production never stopped. Over time, something changed. Not the danger, that was always there, but how people saw it. It became normal, expected, part of the process. And that might have been the most dangerous shift of all, because once risk feels normal, you stop noticing how close you are to it. By the 1920s, the furnaces had changed. They grew larger, taller, more powerful. What once felt like dangerous machinery now felt like something else entirely, a contained force. Each new design promised better efficiency, higher output, more control. Furnaces processed more material than ever before, holding greater amounts of heat, pressure, and energy inside their walls. And for a while, it seemed like it was working. Production increased, systems improved, confidence grew, but something else grew with it: the consequences. Because the bigger the furnace became, the harder it was to control. More heat, more pressure, more material moving through the system at once. Everything had to stay perfectly balanced. And when it did, the results were impressive. But when it didn't, there was no easy way to respond. The scale itself became part of the risk. What used to be manageable was now overwhelming. Over time, the industry began to understand something important. Not all problems could be eliminated. Some could only be managed. Better materials reduced wear. Improved ventilation lowered exposure. New procedures increased awareness. Accidents became less frequent, but they didn't disappear. because at its core, the system hadn't changed. It still depended on constant heat, constant pressure, constant operation, and admit the risk never fully went away. What changed the most wasn't the technology. It was the perspective. In the beginning, furnaces were seen as symbols of progress, something to admire, something to celebrate. But over time, that view shifted. They were no longer seen as something to trust completely, but something to respect, because the more people learned about how they worked, the clearer it became. Control was never absolute. It was temporary, conditional, and always one step away from failure. And that's the lesson the furnace left behind. Some systems can't be made completely safe, only managed, only controlled, to a point. And the moment we forget that, the moment we believe we're fully in control, that's when we're closest to losing it. Because the furnace never truly changed. It didn't become harmless. We just learned how to live with it. And maybe that's the most dangerous thing of all.